Hi everyone, it's Stephanie Weaver. I'm here in the blue and yellow kitchen with Microwave Boy on the camera, Daisy the Golden Retriever, and Margo. Hi Margo, how are you?
Hi Stephanie, I'm great. Thanks for having me today.
Great. And so this is Margo Orlando. Is it Little or Littell? I forgot to ask you.
Littell.
Littell. Okay.
Littell.
Margo Orlando Littell. She's the author of The Distance from 4 Points, which is a brand new novel out from the University of New Orleans Press. And I'm super excited to have you here today. Yay!
All right, great. This is exciting.
This is great. So this is a novel that's set in the Pittsburgh region of Pennsylvania, and I'm going to be cooking a dish that's kind of central to one of the scenes in the book, which is halushki. So tell us about halushki, because Microwave Boy and I had never heard about it.
Yeah, so this is a dish. It's kind of an Eastern European dish. Very, real comfort food. There's noodles, there's bacon, there's butter, there's cabbage. It's a very earthy dish, very simple to make. And where I grew up in southwestern Pennsylvania, south of Pittsburgh, there are a lot of Eastern Europeans in the area. So this is sort of a common regional dish that sort of surpasses its ethnicity. So I experienced it in my hometown at church festivals, for example, which is, a great place to serve a dish like this. And it wasn't necessarily a dish in my family. We're Italian, so we never ourselves, but I consider it sort of a Pittsburgh food.
Great.
Well,
Okay.
I can tell you, the first time I smelled this dish cooking, I thought of my grandma, who was an Eastern European.
Yeah.
I mean, she had like the same dress every year or every day.
And she wore the same
So
dress.
it evoked memories for me.
For
It was
sure.
very good.
Yeah.
All right, good.
So I usually what I do is I do a test cook of whatever the recipe is, so I feel like I'm really comfortable with it. So it does call for egg noodles or yolk-free noodles, and I was lucky enough to be able to find these, which are gluten-free, the Manischewitz. Now these are the thin egg noodles. Normally I think you would make it with the wider ones, but I was super excited to find gluten-free ones, and I'm going to go ahead and throw them in the boiling water over here that's been salted a little bit, and because they take about 10 minutes. And then we're going to go ahead, and so I've got my cooktop here, and I'm going to start with half of the butter. So we'll share the link to the recipe. I found a great.
And what is this called again?
So it's called halushki. Is that how it's pronounced? Yeah, okay, halushki. I think it's spelled a couple different ways, so I saw a bunch of different recipes for it online, but the one that I'll share with you I really liked because it was super specific on the amounts, and I felt like the ratio of noodles to cabbage seemed kind of important. So I'm melting the butter. I've got some delicious onions, thinly sliced. And they're going to go in the butter. And it's such a simple, so this is what really intrigued me, was I thought, okay, it's got 4 ingredients. It's noodles, butter, bacon, and cabbage, and onion, I guess 5. How good could it possibly be? It's so delicious. We couldn't believe it. I made a half recipe and I was like, I totally should have made a whole recipe. This is amazing. So let me just...
It's the bacon. It's got to be the bacon.
It's the bacon, yeah. Sorry. Ooh, that was strong. Okay, so onions are in, and I've got pre-cooked a couple slices of bacon that I've diced up. We're going to put those in there, and then I'm going to get the cabbage in there in just a second. Okay, so the book is The Distance from 4 Points, and it's set south of Pittsburgh, correct?
That's right.
So, and about an hour and a half south of Pittsburgh, is that right?
Yeah, that's about where it's set. It's very close to the West Virginia border, sort of equidistant between Morgantown, West Virginia, and Pittsburgh. So it's pretty rural. There's nothing around it. There are a lot of people in this part of the world that can go their whole lives without even seeing the city of Pittsburgh. It's pretty isolated in the mountains.
Yeah. So, and it's the northern Appalachian part of the range. So it's considered Appalachia, which I didn't realize that there was even part of Pennsylvania that was considered Appalachia. And by the way, I was born in Pittsburgh, but didn't live there for more than a couple months. So that was a surprise to me. And then I've got to I did cheat and I bought pre-shredded cabbage just to make life easier. So I'm going to throw the cabbage in.
That existed.
Yeah, it just makes life a lot easier.
So how did this fall into the book here, this recipe?
So go ahead and
What's the
tell
story
us.
behind
Yeah,
it?
tell us about. Wow, that
Sure.
seems like a lot.
So Halushki is part of this scene that occurs after a bit of drama takes place. So our protagonist, Robin, who is a unwilling landlord in this small town called 4 Points, takes in a tenant named Cindy Sweeney, who she happens to have this relationship with from her teenage years. They were best friends when they were young girls, and they have kind of this troubled past together. They were both very, very poor, very desperate to make ends meet, and so they both ended up becoming teen prostitutes. This scene happens 20 years later when Robin ends up back at 4 Points, again sort of broke and desperate, but this time turning to landlording to make ends meet. And when Cindy takes over as tenant in one of her properties, she immediately brings all of the drama of his past life with her, and she has this boyfriend who is just kind of a no-good guy, and he resents her moving out and comes by one day to her new rental and breaks all the windows with his belt. And a few days later, Cindy comes over to Robin's house burying a pot of halushki as kind of an apology for this mess that she was responsible for bringing into Robin's life. So she brings halushki. Robin is not happy to see her, but she invites her in, and Cindy has brought her own daughter with her, and Robin has her daughter Haley there as well. And so the 4 women sit down around this very old kitchen table in this decrepit hotel, and they share a meal. And this is kind of a turning point between Robin and Cindy, who are definitely adversaries. This is a person Robin never wanted to see again, but now they're sitting there sharing this food. And it's the first time Robin's returned to 4 Points that there's actually a bit of community that she has found. She's not sure what to do with it yet, but it's a moment of warmth, and it opens the door a little bit to a renewed, odd friendship with Cindy. And so it's kind of a key scene. I knew it had to be a comfort food there, and I wanted to be something very Pittsburgh specific that they would easily make in this area, even if you don't have a lot of money. So that's where halushki fits into the story.
Got it. And so one of the things that I love this book, and one of the reasons why I wanted to feature Margo is that university presses put out beautiful books every year, and because they're not the big 5 New York publishers, they don't get a lot of marketing budget behind them, and so they just kind of tend to be sort of these quiet books, I like to call them, that are worthy of our time and attention. And so when we connected and she sent me the book to read on my iPad, I was just completely absorbed in the story. It's beautifully written. I think you've created some wonderful characters. There's a whole redemption sequence. The whole storyline is kind of a redemption story. And so that's partly why I wanted to just showcase this, is because it's not a big book. Like there's like 10 big books a year that get a whole bunch of press. And then there's all these other wonderful books that don't get that attention. And I think it's a quiet story too. So one of the things that I liked about it was, so your protagonist, Robin, when the book starts, she's, I think, a pretty familiar character to a lot of us. If you think of sort of a suburban soccer mom who's well off, and she's manicured, and she has her hair done, and she has a nice car, and all of that is about to fall apart. And the 2 things that really caught my attention on the first page is she's got this, it's very cold, she's going to see the attorney that's been helping her, and she's wearing this expensive pashmina scarf, but she's lost one of her cashmere gloves. Or I don't know, they were cashmere or some kind of fancy leather or something. And her manicure is, she's basically had to peel her own manicure off because she can't afford, so her hands are like a wreck. So she's still got sort of half of her old life, and then her new life is sort of galloping towards her. And so I thought that just in that first page, in that first sequence, I learned so much about who this woman was, and how she, where she's going to end up is this town she vowed she would never wanted to see again. And I think there's a lot of us who grew up in small towns or who grew up in places maybe we didn't have a very happy childhood, and we're like, I'm out of here, I'm never seeing you people again, I'm never coming back. And this is the story about what happens when someone has to go back and they have to make a life there because that's their only choice left. Did I do all that justice?
Absolutely, and I really like your read on that first scene because that's really what drives Robin for a lot of the novel, is that she kind of insists on keeping one foot in the Four Points world, or one foot in the Mount Rinda world, her fancy new life, and one foot back in Four Points, and she can't sustain that balance for the entire novel. And there's a moment where she does go back to Mount Rinda, a couple moments, and in both of those instances you can see that she doesn't belong there anymore.
Right.
Much as she wants to hold on to it, much as she's grasping it, she doesn't. It's not her home anymore. Meanwhile, her Four Points life is taking on more depth and more significance, and it takes her a while to acknowledge that, accept it. So I think your interpretation of that first scene is spot on.
Yeah, and I think, part of what it shows is that a lot of that, well-off life that we see people have, maybe we don't have it ourselves, but we see other people, a lot of that is really on a kind of razor's edge of credit, and you don't really know what's going on behind the scenes of people's lives. And yet as soon as that couple breaks up, and I don't want to reveal too much because I try not to do spoilers with these, but as soon as the husband's out of the picture, all of a sudden now the wife doesn't have a place. And I think I've known a lot of people who've gone through divorces where they're like, the hardest thing was I lost all my friends, or all my friends went with the spouse, and or that now I'm not part of, I can't live in this house in this specific right neighborhood. Can I get an apartment in town and still keep my kid at the school? But the whole illusion of the life is sort of broken. And I thought that was a really interesting theme to explore in a novel, for sure.
Yeah, and with Robin, I don't think it gives away too much to say that she was really blindsided by her husband's deception. Ray dies off page before the novel even begins in just a tragic accident, and she then discovers that instead of being the affluent suburbans she thought they were, he'd actually blown all of their money, all of their savings on these rental properties as a kind of investment, intending to fix them up and have this passive income stream. And of course he died before any of that came to fruition. And so her entire house of cards topples, and she had really based her identity on building this new life, capital N new life, leaving the past behind, sealing it off, building something impressive and ostentatious even. And it was all a charade, and she had no idea. So it's a reckoning for her, and she has to deal with that back in the place that caused her to build that illusion in the first place.
Right. So, so she has a daughter, a teenage daughter, which I think was a great choice. How did you decide? So are you somebody, so there's, for those of you that aren't writers, which is probably most of you, so there's something in fiction called plotting versus pantsing, and plotters kind of think through the whole book and then they write it, and then pantsers like to just kind of fly by the seat of their pants, and they have an idea and they see where it goes. So what camp do you fall into?
I am definitely a pantser.
Oh, cool.
I am not a very efficient writer. I have to write a lot of pages before I can hone in on what my story is about. And the story began really wildly. I had been working on another book, another manuscript that it turned out to just be going nowhere. I was kind of going around in circles with it, and I thought the only way to break out of this is to write something that has a propulsive plot. And I am not a plot-driven writer. I am a character-driven writer, but I wanted to try a heavy plot. So there was, in the original version of the story, there was a kidnapping, there was arson, there was a nun who was like faking a pregnancy. It was wild. It was all over the map. I had to read it all. I know it's crazy. And then I had to write all of this before I realized what the story was, what the core of the story was, which was her and this town, and her to this town. It didn't have to be so dramatic to have heart, and so that was what I had to zero in on. I really prefer revision, so in the revision process is where I can finally map out where I've been and where I'm going and make sure all the scenes are kind of getting me there one by one.
Great.
It's not, and there are lots of not wasted pages, but discarded pages. Lots
Yes.
of darlings that have to meet their demise, and only then do I really have a story. So maybe one day I'll become more of a plotter. I would like that, but I don't think that's how I operate.
Yeah.
Did you have some personal connections while you were writing that?
Personal connections to the
Well,
story.
we were talking about Reynolds and
Yeah, I did. So when I began researching this book, I went back to my hometown in southwestern Pennsylvania, and I knew I had to see some decrepit rentals in person. I was looking at listings online on Zillow and Craigslist, and you can get a sense of these places, but you can't really get the full picture until you step into them yourself. And so I wanted to see some homes for sale that were like the worst homes, the most decrepit, falling over homes, one step away from being condemned or maybe even condemned. So the realtor took me in. It was one November or December I went back. The places that we saw were absolutely amazingly terrible. There, in a couple of instances, the realtor would go to let me in, and the door fell up into the property. These were they had been stripped of pipes, they had been stripped of all their copper wiring. These are places, knocking on death's door. But they were also so fascinating to me because my hometown, was once a very wealthy coal and coke town. And so there are remnants of this wealth all over the place. There are beautiful old homes all along the main street of town where the millionaires once lived. And they're still standing, these houses, but they have definitely met an unhappy fortune. So they've been split into triplexes or duplexes. They have been neglected by landlords. They have been basically neglected to the point of falling over in many cases, actually literally falling into like a ravine or behind them. They are falling apart. But there was one house that we saw, my husband and I, that was absolutely beautiful. Red brick, 3 stories, enormous, with all these old details still somehow intact. Stained glass, original woodwork. There was a turret that was missing the peak. There was a mysterious tunnel in the basement. It was an absolutely breathtaking home, which had been abused and abandoned. So it was a triplex. It was just falling apart. The smell was palpable, hard to even walk through. And we kept thinking about it. And a friend of mine ended up buying this house and invited me and my husband to partner on a flip. And we thought, great, we're going to save this special place. We're going to bring it back to life, and we are going to find a family to make it home. And we did the first part really well. We made it a showpiece. Pictures of this beautiful saved home went viral on Facebook. It had over 1 million people viewed them, thousands of shares and comments from all over the world. It was exciting. And then we couldn't sell the house. It was, the location was a difficult location. And we struggled, so we had to take it off the market and get tenants. And so at that point, fiction and reality became interwoven in this really interesting way. I became a small town landlord, just like my protagonist.
Wow.
I wasn't living in my town anymore. I was still living in New Jersey, managing tenants from afar. And it was as terrible as you can imagine. I was lied to and bounced checks and, background checks turning up all manner of crazy things. And so I had to deal with these as I was writing Robin's story.
So it was a life imitates art situation for sure.
It was life imitates art. And the really interesting conclusion is that my pub day for the distance from 4 Points was on May 28th. And we actually finally closed on a sale on May 29th.
Oh, wow.
So, and the flip had the same life cycle.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
You can't make this stuff up.
No, you really can't. Okay. So here we go. How's that look?
That looks amazing.
Looks like I did a good job.
Yeah. Really
So again, it's just.
So can I see that too?
Yes, I'm sorry. I always forget to show him.
Bacon girl, thank you.
It's noodles, lots of butter. So how could it be bad? Bacon. I'm wearing my bacon T-shirt today in honor of the bacon, and cabbage and onions. So it's super simple, And when the first time I made it, Microwave Boy was like, "Oh my gosh, I never realized the smell I associated with my grandmother was cabbage, but that's what she was always cooking."
Yeah.
Mm.
Myself.
It's so tasty. It's so comforting. You still get the texture from the onion and the cabbage, so it's not just one like sort of mushy. It still has some nice, chewy texture to it. The noodles kind of melt in there. The bacon is just the right amount of flavoring. So I think this recipe that I found was a good one, but I also just think so one of the things that happens is, your protagonist, Robin, has very little money. And so she's got like a wad of cash from selling all of her nice stuff, and she moves into this town. She lives in one of these bad rentals, and she's trying to get people to pay her the money every month and fix stuff up. And so she, really doesn't have much money for groceries. And so I think what you captured so well, and of course now with what's happening in the country with so many people out of work and people showing up at food banks that never in a million years went to a food bank in their life, it's very relatable, this struggle of of not having enough or having to decide, can I afford peanut butter, or should I buy the cheapest this? And so there was a scene, and it was one of those scenes where she's still kind of holding on to her old life. So she has one friend from her old life who's been reaching out and trying to stay in contact, and she's basically not telling her like what's going on. So they agree to meet, and she feels like she has to bring something. So she goes to the store to make this like her old life salad, which is like quinoa and some other stuff, and it's just like all of her money is going into this one silly salad because she's still trying to keep up this facade for her friend. And so it's, I feel like the two meals, that, kind of fancy salad meal, and then this meal where this is the first sort of moment where she and Cindy, you can kind of see that maybe they are going to end up reconnecting, and that she's been so hungry and she's like living on hot dogs and just like the cheapest food. And then this woman comes that she really doesn't want to see, but she walks in with this steaming, warm, dish that's just comfort and bacon and butter, and I could really feel like how much that meant to her, because you've done such a good job of describing the despair that they were living in with she and her daughter. So I think you did a great job with that.
Thank you.
For sure.
Thank you. Yeah, it was definitely a special moment for Robin. I think she had been preparing, just heating up some canned soup before Cindy shows up with the halushki, and I really wanted to show what a relief that was, that she was not going to have to eat that heated up canned soup.
Yeah. Well, you described the soup as like already getting a skin on it even before it's even cold, and you're like, oh yeah, I've had that soup, and how nice it would be to have someone show up with this dish, which is very simple and not expensive to make. Cabbage is cheap, onions are cheap, noodles are cheap unless you buy the gluten-free fancy ones like I did. So this was great. We're giving away this copy of the book. So the way that you enter to win is you share this video and tag a friend that you think might enjoy the book, and then leave a comment under this video that you did that, so I can see that you did it. And then even will come with this lovely little bookmark that has Margo's pretty picture on it, so you're all set when you win that book. And I want to thank you, Margo, for being here. You can find more about Margo Orlando Littell at margoorlandolittell.com. Follow her on social media. And check out, if you have a university press near you, which you may not even realize you do, check out their books, because they're publishing wonderful stories, very excellent writers. And, you might not see a notice about them in, the New York Times book review, but they're very much worth finding and reading. So, Margo, I want to thank you so much for being here and for introducing us to Halushki.
Great. Thank you so much. It was fun. I hope you enjoy your meal.
For sure. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.